Like I said, it's an addiction of thought. It's an addiction of the brain that can, manifest in a lot of ways. It causes flawed thinking and logic. Some people use illegal substances to kind of manipulate their brain chemistry, and others don't. Most people don't. Um, and so, for a good example of how it doesn't have to be a substance is like people that are addicted to gambling, or people that are addicted to shopping, or things like that, right? You don't need to take a substance necessarily for it to be qualified as an addiction. There's other stuff at work which I'll talk about later. The next one, addiction has to do with how much you use or do. It has very little to do with how much or how often you spend doing something. Someone might be like, "Well, I only drink once a week. I'm not an alcoholic." Okay, that's possible. It's also you could be an alcoholic who drinks once a week because you're trying the other 6 days not to, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to do with how much you use, right? That's all I have to say about that. It's more how having to do with how you're using sin to replace, or you're using that sin to replace God, right? To make you feel better, to cover up or to cope with something bad that's happened. Also, the next one, addiction has to do with how often you use. That's kind of the same thing as how much, right? Well, it could be like, it just doesn't have to do with how often you use it either. You could use it once a month and still be addicted to it because, like I said, you're trying the other however many days a week not to do it. Or it could be that you do it every day. It doesn't really matter. That's not what qualifies it as addiction. The next one is addiction is purely biological. I already kind of talked about this. That's not necessarily. Addiction is uncommon. That's also not true. Literal substance abuse is about 10% of the population, and it actually hits just about every demographic equally, except for alcohol is a weird one. It depends on what your ethnicity is. It's higher or lower. But for the most part, with every other addiction, across pretty much any demographic, it's equal. 10% of teachers, 10% of politicians, 10% of janitors, 10% of college students, all right? It's a pretty steady, it's like a normal disease, right? It doesn't care what your, ethnic background is, or your socioeconomics, or your school, or your age. It just afflicts with no mercy, all right? But that's only, like I said, counting illegal substances. So if you count people that aren't using illegal substances but still addicted, it's going to be higher. Addiction affects mostly the poor and educated, like I said. Also not true. Just as many CEOs are alcoholics as there are homeless people. Now, most homeless people, it may seem higher because most homeless people are people that are mentally ill or addicted, so they ended up homeless because of that. But I mean, if it were purely, I just couldn't find a job, and that's why you're homeless, then the ratio would be the same. Another one is that you can quit your addiction with enough willpower. Well, people that are addicted are just weak-minded. That's clearly what's going on. That's actually not the case. And actually, what we'll come to find out is that willpower is the enemy of addiction recovery, because it's willpower that kind of allows us to continue to believe that our addiction isn't a problem and that we don't need help with it, right? So I got this covered. No worries, no worries. I don't need. It's all right. I'm good. I'm good. You know. So willpower is actually the enemy of recovering from this. If an addict is punished enough, that will make them quit. Well, I work with this because I work with kids. Well, they won't be addicted anymore if I just make stronger boundaries and more rules at home. If I just don't ever leave the house, or if I don't ever let them leave the house, or if I send them to jail, if I call the cops on them when I see them, that's what's gonna make them clean. But that's kind of not what's going on here. Again, a threat of punishment won't deter someone from doing something that they're addicted to or that they're bent on doing. Many addicts, if you like, the saying goes in addiction, like says, if you put for an alcoholic, if you put a bottle of alcohol on the table and told him you're going to shoot him, if he takes a drink from it, and you sit there long enough, he will take a drink. And addiction is that pervasive. It's that strong. Think of it like, what's a good? Absolutely. Absolutely. The addiction is primary, right? That's what it said in the definition. It's primary, which means it takes priority over other stuff in your life, which is part of what we'll get to in the definition. All right, and the last one. If you can be cured without medication, then it's not biologically based. Because some people say, like, well, you can go to AA meeting and get better, so it's not like it's really biology, right? But as we talked about before, your thinking affects your brain chemistry. Your brain chemistry affects your behavior. So it's kind of it can work that way too. All right. So, kind of going to look at indicators of abuse here. Right. All right. Indicator could be if you're neglecting your responsibilities at school or work or home, just to have the opportunity to do your sin of choice. That could be neglecting schoolwork, compromising your relationships, say if you had a sexual addiction, maybe showing up late to work or not at all, or for whatever, because you were participating in your sin, right? It was so important that you put off whatever other things are important to you in order to do it, all right? And abuse and addiction are different. So this is abuse, and then addiction's the next slide. This is like a lesser form of addiction, all right? Another sign of abuse, you're sinning under dangerous conditions or despite personal consequence. So maybe you find that, let's see, what's a good example? I don't know, I can't think of one right now. But basically, whatever your sin of choice is, it's something that either requires dangerous conditions to do, or you're willing to do it under dangerous conditions just because it's that important to you to participate in that sin, whatever, yeah. Another one is your sin's getting you into trouble. All right, so pretty much in any area of your life. Well, as far as sinning under dangerous conditions, that could be like you're gonna get in trouble with the law or people that you love, or when you're having some sort of consequence that's physiological or psychological as a result of your sin, and you continue to keep doing it even though it harms you. All right, and then the last one, your sin of choice is causing problems in your relationships. So that could be fights with your significant other, with your family members. You're unhappy with a boss. Losing old friends, things like that. And the bottom line is basically when you have negative consequences for your sin of choice, you kind of do it anyway. All right? And then the next one is indicators of addiction, all right? One would be you've built up a tolerance, right? And an important thing to say is on the last slide and this slide, it doesn't take like, oh, if I don't have all of these things, then I'm not addicted. It really, any one of those, just one, is a strong indicator that you need to take